Hi there, and welcome to the Mini Sculpting Super Show. I'm your host, Tom Mason, and today's episode, we are going to do another round of Sculpting Archives. This time, I'm going to cover the year 2004. In this year, this was kind of the first time that I thought maybe I could do this sculpting thing, and that it's what I really wanted to do, and that it would be possible to one day do it full time. You know, it was always kind of a dream, it was always the plan, but this was the year that I really got into my head that I could do this, and that from every year then on, it was always in the back of my mind, no matter where I worked, what I did, I was always thinking, man, I'm going to sculpt miniatures full time, all the time. Didn't quite work out that way, but it kept pushing me along, and I kept at it. And I'm really proud of the work I did. This year was great because it was the first year I met one of my lifelong friends, Frank from Grimy Games. And it was the first time that I really felt that I got into the industry. I made contact with, or they made contact with me actually, Magnificent Egos. And that just started a whole adventure into the world of sculpting miniatures and the industry. So, but that's a story for another time. Let's get on with the show. The Mini Sculpting Super Show is powered in part by Sculptomo Toys. See everything they have to offer at sculptomotoys.com. 2004 kicks off the fourth and final sculpt that I did for FG Minis. I actually did concept art for two other figures I was going to do. One's a skeleton warrior, which is still one of my favorite drawings I've ever done, even to this day. I kind of wonder if I can even draw like that anymore. It's just the amount of kind of detail and intricacies. I just not interested in doing that kind of style anymore, but I really like what I did. And the other one was this Black Knight kind of guy. Anyways, really like that. That was fun to draw as well. But this guy, this is a wizard. His name was E-Dash. And as you can probably guess and see, it's basically just my version of Gandalf. Very much, very similar in many ways, very traditional, basic wizard. The cool thing about this guy for me was that I feel like I really started to get a better sense of how to do hands. You can see it on how he's holding the staff. There's a lot, out of shadow, there's a lot more subtlety to the way the hand is. Let me see if I can get the light better. I don't know if I can. Anyways, there's a lot more subtlety to the way he's holding the staff. Okay, I have to accept that I'm not going to get it. Anyways, there's a lot more subtlety to the way he's holding it, and especially this hand here, which is actually in his beard, kind of pawing at it, just running his fingers through it, and there's just, I put a lot of really cool little the veins and tendons in it. I just really like that. Overall, the rest of the guy, not too bad. Some of the folds and cloth, it's a little bubbly. But and the one last thing, so I made a base for this. That's kind of neat, but again, very thick, way too thick, tons of wasted metal. But this, he had a little bag. I think it went probably like back here, but he's got a little familiar in there, peeking out, his little eyes and his little hands sticking out of the bag. Now that's something that I really enjoy about 54mm miniatures. It's just because of the size, it's a lot easier to put in those extra little details to add a little more character, a little more fun to the sculpt. Next up are this really cool range of miniatures that I did for a little company called Grimy Games. This was done for a guy named Frank, who, through sculpting these figures, these little goblin kind of dudes, Frank became one of my best friends, and we used to talk for hours about all our game ideas and miniature ideas, and he is probably one of the greatest inspirations I had to really push and realize that you can make your own stuff and sell it. And he wrote some really cool rules for this game and lots of other little ones. But another thing that's super cool about these Grimies is they were my very first 25 millimeter or 30 millimeter, typical miniature size commissions. And I really had a lot of fun doing them. I got to do the concepts for these guys as well. It was a lot of fun, and I ended up doing I think 6 total. Yeah, I did one called Whiplash, which I think was the only Grimy with a name. That might not be correct. It's the only one that I remember and have written down on my list. But the very first one I did was named Whiplash, and he had an eyelash whip. So the premise of the Grimies was really fun too. It was that they're basically these little snot goblins kind of things that they lived and fought in the real world. So there's been a couple games that have done it since, but I had never heard of this being done before. But in this one, the terrain was whatever, like a soda can or a book, because literally they were fighting on your tabletop. And so it made it very easy to set up an interesting battlefield and be able to fight and have a lot of fun. So the first one was Whiplash, and then going down the line, I did a Grimy with a wart mace, one with a two-handed toenail. So this is a toenail that they fashioned into a big two-handed sword. Slingshot. I don't remember if that was anything specifically weird or gross about that in the lore. The crossbow, Grimy, again, kind of a little more traditional. And then last but not least was the Snot Mage, and he could do some magic spells with gross fun powers. But these, I actually used Whiplash in my portfolio for years, just because I think it looks like a pretty good sculpt even to this day. I mean, there's little things that could have been better and went out, of course. It was many years ago, but it was a lot of fun, and this project really taught me kind of how I was going to be as a sculptor, about the way I wanted to tackle the miniatures, and really started getting me acclimated to sculpting in the more traditional 30 millimeter, 25, 35 millimeter size that we know and love today. Unfortunately, I think all of these were destroyed during the mold making process, so I don't have any of the original greens, but still got the pictures, concepts, and the memories. While I was working on the Grimies, I also received a commission from a company called Doppelganger USA, and that was run by a really cool guy named David Pinnock. He's still super active in the miniatures industry. He's had a couple different little companies, and he's just very prolific on TMP and other places, always out there and doing fun and interesting things. A lot of times very specifically in the kind of more of a pulp genre. So this commission was for a pair of male and female sci-fi hard suits. And I know I had both of the greens, but for some reason I can only find the female one. So what was interesting about these, I got to do the concepts as well, and that was a lot of fun, as it always is. I kind of forgot how many times that I did the concept art for my early sculptures. It definitely starts to change here coming up soon. But anyways, but these guys were actually sculpted on the Reaper Miniatures Heroic Armature base, or dolly bases. Those are the guys that basically have full, very superhero musculature, but no face, just a kind of a round blob for the head. And all I did because these were just need to be kind of nice, plain stand-in characters, and I just twisted the hands a little bit to make them a little bit more different looking. Really pleased with how these turned out. One thing, when you sculpt on a dolly, it can make your miniature, it will make your miniature thicker, and so that's one thing that would have been a little nicer if some of these elements, like the legs, maybe were just a touch thinner, because when you're sculpting from scratch, rather than sculpting all the leg anatomy just as it should be and then laying on plates, you would actually sculpt up the leg anatomy not quite all the way and then put on the plates, and then it kind of gives a little more control of the shape and the form. But it was a lot of fun. It was a good experience. It was neat to be able to see that you could how you could create do a miniature a lot faster because you've got a base dolly. Another cool thing that David did for me that was super awesome, and he always liked to get bronze masters. So here you can see this is the male one with the female, and that's why this green, you probably noticed on my previous sculpts that a lot of the greens were very dark. And That's because they're vulcanized, and when that happens, they get a little scorched, a little rubber, some black rubber and stuff like that on them. But with this, they made a mold and then cast it in bronze, and the way they make the mold, doesn't scorch the miniature at all. And these things are immaculate and basically will last me forever. So it's a very neat little memento from my work on these heart suits for Doppelganger USA. This is the first miniature I ever sculpted for an eccentric company named Magnificent Egos. This miniature is named Horkia. I think he had a last name too, but I don't. Oh yeah, Horkia Mortal, and he is he's like an ogre Mexican wrestler, or an ogre with a Mexican wrestling mask on. And his key features are, the mask, and of course this spiked codpiece, which I don't know why I have a casting of it, but I'm glad I do, because it really shows you. This is amazing. I can't believe they're actually able to cast this thing. That's really impressive, because normally when you're poking up into the mold, it's very hard to get that to all fill in. But Magnificent Egos, these other companies, I definitely got my feet wet and got to learn a lot, taught me a lot. But Magnificent Egos was the company that really, I would say, brought me into the industry. Chris Clark, he was the guy that started Magnificent Egos. He literally is the Magnificent Ego, if you ever met him. Really cool guy, but he has a huge ego. And he'll tell you that himself, so I don't think he'll mind me saying that. But he took a chance on me early on, and he spoke so highly of me to other people in the industry, Reaper specifically, Reaper Ron and some other folks, and it meant so much to me, and it really, really helped propel me into the miniatures industry, and to get other people to look at me more seriously. And not that they weren't, but I didn't really have a web presence or anything. It was all word of mouth. So to have someone speak so highly of you and tell other people that they should be hiring me when he himself was hiring me to do stuff meant a lot. And it was really cool company to be a part of, because they were very much like Reaper. They're actually I think they actually knew the Reaper folks pretty well. He was down near Texas, and but what they were doing, they were trying to do just these crazy, insane player characters that so many people create. Everybody, they make a fighter, they make a wizard, but when you play a campaign for many years, it's you don't just have a fighter, you don't just have a wizard. You end up with an ogre with a wrestling mask, or, as you'll see when I get onto a few more of these Magnificent Ego miniatures, very interesting character quirks. And I got to work at their booth at Gen Con several times, and that's where I really got bit by the bug to be in the game industry, working professionally, and taking part in the spectacle that is Gen Con and convention life. And so, this miniature, even though it was a challenge, because back to doing another big one, which is, I do not like to do these, especially in green stuff. I much prefer the smaller miniatures. It was so worth it, because it led to so much more work and so many contacts. So let this be a lesson to you. Be willing to step out of your comfort zone and to work for people and get your name out there. It can lead to great things. Now, I mentioned Chris Clark being, the founder of Magnificent Egos, but he actually had a few other principles, and one of the most important ones, was an artist who many of you probably know, even if you don't realize it, named Jason Engel. And I was a fan of Jason's artwork for years. I used to pore over it during college. It was somebody that I was trying to figure out how to emulate. I just really loved his stuff. And when I found out that Jason was doing all the concept art for Magnificent Egos, and I was asked what I wanted to do, I said I would love to do Uthmar, Lord of the Clans. I believe the piece is just called Lord of the Clans, but I'm a huge fan of barbarians, always have been, and that was one of my favorite pieces that I ever saw him do. And so I was thrilled when Chris gave me the chance to sculpt this guy. He's very epic and imposing. I really like it. I was really honored to do it. It was tricky though, because I wanted to capture this sword. I didn't take the shortcut. I don't know if I'd say shortcut, but I could have pulled his arms in more and made this a single piece. I wanted him to be standing as he was supposed to be, with the sword a little bit further out from his body, big scabbard on his back. But that was kind of tricky, and I hadn't really learned how to do multi-part. So as you can see, it doesn't quite line up. It's a little tricky to get. I think that's how it's supposed to go. It's just a little tricky, looks a little bit awkward. But as far as technique, I feel like I was really starting to get better at just general details and refinement on the miniature. You don't see as many blobby looking things. This cloth is much more purposeful, and this horn, it's got a nice little interesting details to it, and even the hair is I'm getting a lot better at smoothing it, not having it be so, I don't know, like it's blobbing up on itself. However, I will say that as much as fun as I had doing this figure, and being able to do a piece that I was really in love with, I'm not a huge fan of how I executed the sculpt. I really feel like I fell down on it. I didn't match, I've got the essence of the art there, but I feel like this really kind of fell into miniature zone, where you're always going to need to modify a sculpture to work in miniature. You're always going to have to modify the art. How am I trying to say this? You're always going to have to modify what you sculpt from the art slightly to make it work better in miniature. And I don't know, I just feel like where I did that was kind of in the wrong places. His waist is a little too slim. His shoulders could have been a bit broader and back, and so I guess what I'm probably trying to say is it just wasn't the epic barbarian that I had always thought it was or envisioned it would be when it was created in a miniature. So even though, for the most part, I'm very proud of technically how I did this guy, part of me kind of wishes somebody else did it, because I think maybe I would have liked that more. And maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Maybe it's just the fact that I got to sculpt basically like a hero piece of art, something that was kind of that I looked up to, and I just didn't feel like I could execute it as well as the source material was executed. So I don't know, maybe I'll contact Jason and maybe I can redo it someday. Nah. I'll move on. Well, that wraps up 2004. Hope you enjoyed seeing what I consider to be really my first professional works in the industry. Go ahead and leave a comment down below, and feel free to share some of your early experiences in sculpting. Whether it's just how you just got started, or maybe you have been in the industry yourself. I know everybody would love to hear about it, and I would too. And don't forget, keep sculpting.